YouTube. Hey, I'm coming up with a new series of videos featuring my books that I've written. I've written a trilogy. It's called Andy Brighton and the Dragons of Wyrme. They're available on Amazon.com. My first book is The Forsaken Orb. It starts with Andy Brighton on Earth and having some adventures, ending up on the moon in a spaceship where he meets Grotoli the dragon among a lot of other individuals. And then at the end of that book, they end up traveling not only back in time, but also all the way to the planet Mars, back when dragons ruled and lived on the planet, and they called it Wyrme. The second book is The Magic of Dragons. That one starts with them on the planet Wyrme, and Andy meets these people called the Rysori, who are spellcasting people, and there's also all the dragons that live on. There's like 4 different types of dragons that live on the planet Wyrme. And then the whole reason why they go back to that planet is because they want to warn them about the Icurnians who are going to be attacking the planet and the dragons of Wyrme. And so that's book 2. And so the Icurnians come and they start attacking. And at the end of that book, the Rysori city of time is destroyed. And the worms or the dragons are in danger. Okay, and so that's where book 2 ends. But today, what I wanted to do is start on book 3, which is The End of Worlds, Andy Brighton and the Dragons of Wyrme. And what I wanted to do was make a series of videos, one video for like each chapter. So, and there's 20 chapters in the book. So I've got my trilogy written. It's all up on Amazon. And so just wanted to read a chapter per video. I wanted to start with book 3 because I think it's maybe the best of the 3. I think I've gotten better at writing along the, as I've written. I actually wrote the first 2 like 12 years ago. And then so there was a giant hiatus, just life, not doing the writing. And so then I started, I think back in December of last year, I started writing this book. And so anyway, so let's get into it. Let me read we got a little a poem on the back. It's because once upon an ancient spell in the land that magic grew, where the dragons forever dwell, and their tales will oft ensue. That's the poem I got for it. That's on the back of all the books. All right, so anyway, we have a map. This is the orbital Arku. It's in the book. It's a place where they're going to end up. It's called an orbital. It's a spaceship. It's like 10 kilometers in diameter and about 1 kilometer tall. So it's very large, very heavy. It's capable of traveling between solar systems. So anyway, so book 3, The End of Worlds, chapter 1, Arrivals. Andy lay sleeping peacefully beneath the boughs of a great prickle-thorn tree high atop Marble Mountain on Wyrme. A gentle breeze cooled the air as he dreamed of glad tidings and friendly faces for what seemed like ages. After a time he awoke and saw a whole other world. The clouds had turned blood red, and the trees all around were blackened, burned to cinders, and the ground he lay on as well. Overhead 1,000 or more dark shapes, dragons he believed, flew about shrieking and wailing, he knew not why. Grotoli flew up from the valley and landed with a crunch on the crusty ground. Andy was glad to see him. However, this welcoming gesture was not returned when instead Grotoli approached angrily and wrapped his claws about Andy's neck and began to squeeze and choke the life out of him. He struggled against the clutches of his so-called friend, but soon ran out of breath. His last thoughts were of confusion for why Grotoli would be doing such a thing. Then with a start, Andy awoke, this time for real, and felt the warmth of a hand on his arm in the darkness and saw the silhouette of someone there sitting on the bed beside him. He squinted and wiped the tears from his eyes and knew that it was Faye. "Hey, where are we?" he asked, trying to forget the terrifying thoughts and shaking himself awake. It was only a dream, he figured, just a fleeting figment of his imagination and so of no consequence. "Well, sleepyhead," Faye chuckled and activated the lights. "We're home again, apparently. Home inside an orbital, if you can believe it. You've been asleep the whole time after Grotoli caught you. You should thank him, 'cause you'd be dead if he hadn't." "Well, I will next time I see him." "Did you see the Toki in your dreams?" "I haven't yet." "Well, I did just after I survived the Bateo ritual back in the sanctuary, or I guess you could say the Valar. But more recently, I haven't, no." "Well, I hope that whatever you saw wasn't unpleasant. You seemed to be a bit agitated about something." "It was nothing to be concerned about." Andy sat up and looked around for his friend Grotoli, hoping he would also be here, but it was only Faye. They were in an orbital, as Faye said. He could tell, having lived in the Forsaken Orb for so long alongside Grotoli. The dark Erdenium stone covered every surface of the three-sided room. A triangular door served as the one exit, and a three-sided window allowed a view of the ship's interior. "Are you feeling all right?" Faye asked, worried about his recent ordeal with the voles. "A little bit of a headache is all," he said. "I'm fine." He got up from the bed and shuffled to the window, where she joined him in looking out. Fog obscured their view of most things in the distance. However, a large lake was visible, as well as a bridge heading off towards the center of the ship. Andy couldn't wait to explore this new orbital, so they stumbled out of the room and descended to ground level, where they were met with a grand park, beautifully landscaped and designed to hold thousands. The land and trees laid out to either side, abutting the outer hull walls, and ran down to beaches in many places, touching the rolling waves farther in and at others hardened to rocky cliffs. Andy reached out for a nearby tree and ran his hand along the rough bark just to make sure it was really there. He thought for a moment that this could all be another Rysori illusion, but it was real. "It's amazing," Faye gasped, staring in awe at the vastness of the scene before them. Andy agreed. "It's hard to believe all of this was built in here and without us ever knowing. And for that matter, that this orbital has been out here for who knows how long," said Faye. They stood at the edge of an overlook above the huge moat-like lake. A few steps led down to the bridge, and in the distance approaching was a group of 4 people. Andy and Faye made their way down the steps onto the bridge to meet what they assumed were a greeting party. The 4 stepped closer, led by someone familiar. "We welcome you gladly," declared Arthurio Morgan, Faye's grandfather and Lord Magistrate. Faye ran up and hugged him happily. Though it had not been long since she had last seen him, she had worried if he had escaped the destruction of time unscathed. Andy also returned their welcome wholeheartedly. "My comrades and I became aware of your arrival when we had the pleasure of making the acquaintance of your friend Grotoli earlier this morning. He told us you were sleeping and would be coming along later when you woke up. He was quite enthusiastic about this orbital, he called it, and had many questions for us, which we couldn't answer. Of course, we had just as many questions about him and your experiences too. We can get to all of that whenever you wish. For now, let us show you the main attraction." The walk across the bridge towards the great control tower went quicker than Andy expected. It was from his experience in the Forsaken Orb, around 3 kilometers, but they had nearly made it across in just a few minutes. Then he saw the main attraction Othario was talking about. Rising up from out of the clearing of heavy fog was the great bluestone city of Arku. It rose up from a grand promenade surrounding the city like a gigantic blueberry donut, with a multitude of towers and spires too numerous to count, and also somewhat reminded Andy of images of the castle at Disney World, which he had never visited in person, though much more detailed and larger in size. "The shining city of Arku," declared Arthurio Morgan. "A wonder to behold, is it not?" "Oh my," exclaimed Faye, "it is glorious." "I have to say," said Andy, "I am impressed." They stood and took in the majesty of what lay before them. Never had Faye or Andy seen such a city as this. It made the city of time look like a tool shed in comparison. As they took it in, Andy noticed one of the women in the group talking secretly to Arthurio after looking strangely at Andy, who then admonished her quickly and quietly. "Is there a problem?" asked Andy. "No, no problem," answered the Lord Magistrate. "She didn't understand, but now she does. It's just that she remembers you as a younger man. I told her you survived the Bateo ritual. In addition to being changed in many ways, it had also aged you significantly." Andy now knew and said, "I see. So Krimlogi has already spoken to you then? You know what I have become?" Othario thought about his next words carefully before speaking. He was one of the eldest of the Raisuri and more knowledgeable than most. However, he had never met anyone who had survived the Bateo ritual in the sanctuary of the great anchorite deep in the Undermine. Arthurio stopped the chorus and bowed low towards Andy with reverence. Andy and Faye grew wide-eyed and returned the bow, although keeping an eye on her grandfather. "Yes, we know and are humbled by your presence. You are known to us as the Arakatua, or in simpler terms, the Chosen One." "Well, that's okay. You can just call me Andy. No need for any formalities," said Andy sincerely. "This is all unexpected and surprising, to tell the truth. Not that I want to seem ungrateful at all. I'm just not looking to have anyone feel subservient to me or anything. It is what it is." Othario and the chorus looked up, expressing surprise for the most part, which quickly faded into jubilation and smiles once again. And so with that, the tour of the city resumed. Andy now noticed, having missed it before, was that running the whole length of the bridge was a magical two-way conveyor belt. There were no handrails or any other way to judge their speed, so it was difficult to see, and only after making it across could he surmise they had moved at least twice as fast as normal. "That was ingenious," he said. "I compliment whoever came up with that idea." Othario agreed, saying, "Yes, and you'll find many more of such conveniences here. Remember, this city was built by us, the Raisuri. This ship itself is a wonder of great scientific innovation and full of futuristic gadgets that I will confess are beyond my knowledge or anyone else here. However, as you well know, we possess many abilities of a magical nature, and so our spellcasting I would rate equally as amazing. The two combined within this ship has perhaps never existed before. Who is to say, really?" Andy thought on this for a while as they strolled along and came to an area jutting out over the lake. It was a smaller park-like area, similar to that across the water they had come to across the bridge. But this had a map of the city illustrated upon a stone table set at about a 45-degree angle, much like what might be found at a national park back on Earth to reference some attraction. Faye examined it closer, curious about the features of Arku, and as she did so, found that this map was also interactive and touch-sensitive, so that whatever area you touched was enlarged and described in detail, and also a navigation path was highlighted upon the streets of the map, as well as lights embedded into the walls and buildings, blinking to show the quickest way there if someone was so inclined to make the journey. "One of our many inventions," said Arthurio proudly. "In fact, anything you come across that references anything built by us has been our creation, obviously." "Once again, I am impressed," Andy added. "You spared no expense, and were not held back in any way in making this a reality, and I am truly interested in everything about this city. However, I am also wondering about my old friend, the Dragon Gritoli, and his whereabouts." The Lord Magistrate and his chorus grinned and nodded with amusement as he told Andy, "Just ask the map." Andy looked surprised that he could simply talk to an inanimate object and get a reply, but he did as Othario suggested and asked, "Map, where is Gritoli the dragon?" Immediately the map grew brighter in response to what Andy had asked, and a spot was highlighted in the central tower, followed by a short description which read out loud: Grotoli the Dragon, Central Upper Observation Room, Level 110. With that, after a few seconds, the map returned to its previous brightness and resumed to function normally. Please pardon my interrupting this wonderful tour of the city, but I'd like to visit with my old friend Grotoli, if you don't mind. I think he's probably fascinated with the operational aspects of the ship, considering he lived in one for millions of years, albeit one not nearly as nice as this. As you wish, Andy, said Arthurio, not that startled to hear from the Chosen One. You, of course, can do as you desire. If you ever have needs of our services again, we are at your disposal. They then bowed, and Arthurio hugged Faye upon leaving and walked off towards some other part of the city. Well, Faye, said Andy, would you also like to visit with Grotoli, or did you have something else in mind? He figured she would probably want to see Grotoli again at some time in the future, but knowing that she was first and foremost a Rysori and that these were her people, he also knew that seeing Grotoli would not be of immediate concern for her like it was for him. I'd love to see him and more of the orbital ship itself, Andy, eventually. I'm sure it's really amazing, but first I'm eager to find my bearings around this city of Arku. There is so much to see and so many friends and family to check up on. Yes, I know. I feel the same way just about Grotoli. We're kind of like family now. We spent a lot of time together, and I think he'd be pretty happy to see that I'm okay. In agreement, they hugged one another and gave each other an awkward smile, and Faye turned to the map to ask it questions and find locations about the city. Meanwhile, Andy already knew where he was headed, and so he began making his way along the streets of Arku and to an elevator within the great central tower where he could ascend to one of the ship's highest levels and revisit his friend. And as much as Faye wanted to be around the magical surroundings and people that she was accustomed to, and even though recently Andy had grown a great deal mystically, she still felt more at home within the confines of technology. He still felt more at home with the confines of technology. So at least for the moment, and like everyone else on this ship, he would have to continue to endure at the behest of both worlds. The return journey to Iconia to those on board the orbital fleet had passed without incident, and seemingly in mere seconds. At one instant, they had left the sole solar system in space near the planet Wyrme, but now, after a blink of an eye on the journey through folded space, their orbital ships had arrived in the nearby solar system of what they had long ago named Iconia Major, after their home world of Iconia, the second planet orbiting the smallest of the stars of a trinary star system, and a red dwarf star that the people of Iconia called Aphax. The passengers of the orbital fleet were released from their flight speed chambers, a safety precaution for the occupants in case an unexpected momentum shift sent objects hurling through the inner environment, and in short order returned to their duties. High up in the command room, a lone light speed chamber opened by computer control, allowing Danable his freedom. Once free, he sat down, rubbing his aching limbs. There were strains on the body these trips through space created that took time to recover from. Medications could ease the soreness, were recommended to ease the soreness, but he had always refused their use. He thought they would make him look weak. In fact, he advised his crew to avoid them too, because he also believed there could be a possibility of drug addiction. After checking over several monitoring stations, relaying all pertinent data concerning the various vessel functions, and seeing that there were no anomalies, Danable felt satisfied in returning to his perusal of everything collected from the Rysori libraries on Wyrme, in addition to all of the Template scrolls and other items that had already been gathered from hidden locations within the temples on Iconia. Most of the books that had been salvaged from the ruins of time were badly damaged by fire, as well as a shredding effect, probably caused by their use of the conveyors to rip the city apart before the bulls lay siege upon the populace. Then, however, sadly, the dragons also did a great deal to further the destruction of the library by breathing fire haphazardly and without restraint. Those damnable dragons, Danable roared. I'll be lucky to find anything of use here. He searched through the collection with what little there was left of it, and only managed to find a small handful of tomes that were able to be saved. He pulled 4 from the lot and set them aside from the pile, too burnt and mangled to use, laying them neatly beside the recovered Template scrolls. We will see what we will see, he surmised angrily. but still with some measure of hope. He called for a cleaning crew to come and remove the remaining debris left strewn on the floor. If anything, Danival did appreciate neatness on his ship and would not stand for garbage of any kind left about. Sargeras Tenay supervised the cleaning himself, which was done quickly and efficiently. "Sir, were there any other orders at this time?" his subordinate asked. Danival glanced down, seemingly pleased with the work, and queried, "What is the latest word from the tribunal? Are they ironically happy with our progress, or are they as annoying as usual?" "I would say that they are an uncomplimentary bunch," replied Tenay, half-jokingly. "You know how they are, sir, predictably disappointed and never at a lack for criticism." "And do they request, or should I say demand, a meeting of me before them?" "Yes, sir, I'm afraid so. It is here on their list of grievances. They had me hand-deliver to you once we arrived back in Iconian space. They request your presence immediately." Danival nodded his acknowledgement and excused the Sargeras. Once alone, he sat quietly brooding and thought of his upcoming meeting, and the more he pondered, the angrier he became. It had taken him many years to get to his station, years of yielding to the obligations and demands of these mere bureaucrats, who grew fat by bowing to the will of a few wealthy Iconians who could not be touched and lived in their own bubble of sorts, isolated away from other people. Most amazing of all, Danival knew that most were Tychanists, while some were also Templists. He surmised that there was no limit of corruption on this planet, and it ate at him like a cancer in his belly that no medications could cure, a disease that must be endured. But even though he was the highest-ranking officer of the Tychanists, he also had certain managerial duties that even he was responsible for, and everyday tasks that needed doing, no matter how mundane he considered them to be. "Put on a grateful smile for the fusspots," he said, standing and straightening his clothes. He pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his hands free of burnt book stains as best he could. "Let's get this over with," he muttered to himself. He made his way down to the planet and to the tribunal court building and paused at the tribunal court door just long enough to take a deep breath and entered. As usual, he was forced to wait his turn to be acknowledged, probably more of a form of insult towards him than simply a matter of them being busy getting to him, he thought, due to his past experience in dealing with these people, and one of them specifically. For of the 5-member court, it was one man among them who Danival had always been at odds with. "Next on the agenda is the matter of world conquest," spoke a member of the tribunal court, a particularly portly man named Justice Chesty. Not to say that on occasion the other members never spoke, or that they weren't obese as well, for they all were equal participants in dealing out their flavor of law, and not a one could be found guilty of missing a meal. But it was Chesty in particular who seemed obsessed with making a mockery of Danival at every chance he could get, especially, it seemed, of late. Danival had noticed greater pushback to his missions in the recent months, which he found troubling. "This has been an ongoing issue for some time now. The confiscation of the orbital vessels by your department, General Danival, was never approved as a permanent situation, or that they were yours to use as you saw fit in these ridiculous journeys across the galaxy. The enormous waste of resources, and for what? To capture and kill other species of life?" Danival could feel the rage growing inside of him as he bottled it up and held his tongue. "Well, what do you have to say to that, General?" Chesty asked. "Oh, sorry, I thought you were being rhetorical. Well, if I did have to answer that, I would have to say I am serving my people. It is I understand what they want of me. The orbitals have become a necessity for now and in the future. Our plans require their use indefinitely." "No, no, no," shouted the justice. Several others followed suit in confirming this opinion. Chesty pointed a fat finger in Danival's direction, saying, "You are greatly overstepping your authority, sir. And I would add that this is not the first time we have found your behavior objectionable." The justice perused a list at hand, silently checking over a number of supposed transgressions, and at length the man shook his head with disdain. "This is not how we do things. This will not do. This will just not do." The justices conferred with one another as Danival waited impatiently. It didn't take long, however, before their decision was reached, and it was already written down on a tablet for Chesty to present before the court. Suspiciously, almost like they had already decided this beforehand, thought the general. We have come to a consensus, sir. Not only are you to relinquish the orbital vessels and all that they contain, but you are to step down as general and be reprimanded for the atrocities that you and those under you your command have committed. Justice Chesty read aloud. Danival grit his teeth at hearing these words. He could not believe it had come to this, his whole life's work destroyed by these bureaucrats in a matter of moments. Because of your position and as a sign of respect, we give you 1 week to surrender the vessels and yourself to this court. At that time, your position as general will be vacated and your sentencing will begin. Do you understand our ruling? Danival was devastated, but looked the justice in the eye and said, I do. Justice Chesty half grinned, looking up at Danival, knowing he had won, and said, That is all. You are excused. The harsh sentence slammed down upon Danival like a sledgehammer. He turned and shuffled from the courtroom, utterly dejected, his mind reeling. Moments earlier, he was one of the highest-ranking Takanus officers. Now he was lost, and his future was gone. And within a week, everything he knew would change. He kept thinking, what would he do? He walked outside the court building, closed his eyes, and contemplated existence. Ideas of fleeing or putting up a fight against the court bounced around his brain. Anything other than simply accepting this defeat would be preferable, he thought. But who could he count on to back him up? True, his Sargeras was reliable, but how far did that trust go? This was the end for him. It might also be true that Ternay would be punished, but Danival knew very well that it was him who would bear the brunt of it and the harshest penalty. Ternay, he assumed, would also be made aware of his future soon enough. He sighed, opened his eyes, and looked up. High overhead, he could see the circular shape of his orbital command ship in the cloudless sky. A few moments later, he would return to the ship and resume his final duties as general. All right, that's the end of chapter 1. And so I hope you enjoyed that. I will continue to make more videos, one for each chapter. So maybe not too long, maybe 10 minutes at most. Each chapter is like 10 pages, 10 to 12 pages or something like that. So hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.